My ex left me for a successful woman. He didn't know I was a surgeon who would be operating on his father. Emily Carter stared blankly at the framed photograph on her desk. It showed her and Jordan Miller, arms around each other, smiling against a backdrop of Lake Michigan. It had been taken a year ago during a weekend trip to Door County. The image was warm, full of the affection and stability she had once thought unshakable. Now, it felt like a taunt from another life. 3 years. That was how long she had built a life with Jordan. Through late-night takeout dinners after her hospital shifts, whispered dreams of vacations that never happened, and conversations about building a future. She had loved him not just with the emotional idealism of youth, but with the practical commitment of someone who knew how hard love could be. She gave him time, support, patience, even when her schedule as a cardiac surgeon left her running on fumes. But none of that had been enough. "It's not you," Jordan had said that night, his voice infuriatingly calm as he stood in the middle of her apartment, suitcase at his feet. "I just need someone more ambitious. Someone who sees the world the way I do." Ambitious. The word echoed like a slap. Emily had blinked at him, her body numb, trying to decipher if she was misunderstanding. She had dedicated her 20s to medical school, sacrificed sleep and relationships, endured the relentless pressure of residency, all to become a surgeon in one of the most competitive hospitals in Chicago. Ambitious was not a label she lacked, but that wasn't what he meant. Jordan had already moved on, not just emotionally, he had quite literally moved in with someone else. Claire Benson, a name Emily had only known in passing, mostly from social media. A glamorous tech executive known for her sleek presentations, curated Instagram stories, and interviews about disrupting the health tech space. The kind of woman who wore ambition like designer perfume, loud and expensive. Claire was the one he had chosen. Not for her soul, Emily suspected, but for the spotlight she carried with her. Emily, on the other hand, had always preferred to work in silence, letting her skills speak for her. The breakup wasn't just a personal blow. It was a dismantling of Emily's entire emotional foundation. In the days that followed, she went through the motions, scrubbed in for surgeries, gave instructions during morning rounds, reviewed patient files late into the night, but she felt herself slipping into autopilot. Her colleagues noticed a change, a distracted tone, fewer smiles, long silences in the break room. She kept the truth to herself. Hospitals weren't places for emotional confessions, and Emily Carter wasn't known for weakness. She had built her reputation through stoic excellence. Being the only woman on several surgical teams had taught her that vulnerability was often mistaken for incompetence, so she buried the heartbreak deep under sterile gowns and latex gloves. The only person she confided in was Dr. Maya Liu, her closest friend and fellow attending. Over lukewarm coffee in the staff lounge, Emily finally let herself speak. "He said he needed someone more ambitious," she muttered, staring into her cup. Maya raised an eyebrow. "You're a cardiac surgeon at one of the top hospitals in the country. What's more ambitious than that? Running NASA?" Emily chuckled, but it came out hollow. "He meant a different kind of ambition," she said. "The kind that looks good on social media." Maya reached out and touched her hand, a rare gesture in their emotionally armored world. "Let him chase his illusions. You do what you've always done. Save lives. The rest will catch up." Emily nodded, though her heart remained heavy. That night, she stayed late in the OR, finishing a triple bypass well past midnight. The hum of machines, the measured beeps, the quiet focus of her team. It was the only place where her mind stopped spinning. Outside, the city moved on. People dined, danced, loved, and betrayed. But inside those hospital walls, Emily was still essential, still needed, still powerful. It was the only thing anchoring her in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. As she walked through the hospital corridors the next morning, bleary-eyed and emotionally spent, she passed a TV screen in the waiting area, showing a segment on Claire Benson. The anchor praised her latest startup and showed footage of Jordan standing beside her at a gala, smiling as cameras flashed. Emily didn't stop to listen. Instead, she turned the corner and walked into the surgical wing, where a nurse handed her a new chart. A cardiac case. Serious. Elderly patient. Emily flipped through the file with practiced focus. Her heart had been broken, yes, but she still had a job to do. What she didn't know then was that this next patient would be the beginning of a story far more personal than she could imagine. It was a Wednesday morning when the case file landed on Emily Carter's desk. The hallway outside her office buzzed with the low hum of hospital life. Nurses wheeling supply carts, medical students whispering over tablets, overhead pages crackling through the intercom. Inside, Emily sat in her chair, flipping through a thick folder marked urgent. The name at the top of the chart didn't register at first. Thomas J. Miller, male, 73, admitted through the emergency department after a syncopal episode at home. Preliminary assessments revealed significant coronary artery blockage and evidence of prior cardiac stress. His condition had deteriorated rapidly overnight, necessitating an urgent surgical consultation. Emily skimmed through the angiograms, noting calcified narrowing in multiple vessels. It was a complex case, likely requiring a triple or even quadruple bypass. She grabbed a pen, already sketching out a surgical approach in the margins. She preferred to analyze the anatomy herself before discussing options with her team. Then she turned the page and saw the emergency contact. Her fingers paused. Jordan Miller. She reread the name. For a moment, she wondered if it was coincidence. Miller wasn't an uncommon surname, but as she turned back to the intake forms, she found more confirming details: insurance records, residential address, and a next of kin form signed by Jordan. The handwriting was unmistakable. Emily closed the file and leaned back in her chair. The hum of the hospital suddenly faded to a quiet void. Her mind raced through the implications. The patient was Jordan's father, the same Jordan who had walked out of her life with a suitcase and a shallow justification. And now, by a strange twist of fate, his father was lying in a room just 2 floors below, and she was the attending surgeon responsible for saving his life. She stood up, her legs heavy as she walked out her office and down the hallway toward the cardiovascular ward. Each step felt like walking deeper into a tunnel whose end she couldn't see. When she reached the room, she paused before entering. The blinds were drawn halfway, casting pale strips of sunlight across the bed. A nurse was adjusting N4 drip. Thomas Miller lay propped up on pillows, his face pale but alert. He had a dignified air, the kind of man who had likely been stern and composed his entire life. She knocked lightly on the doorframe. The nurse turned and nodded. Dr. Carter. He's stable but prepped for further consultation. Emily stepped in. Mr. Miller, she said gently, coming to the foot of the bed. I'm Dr. Carter. I've been assigned to your case. Thomas turned his head slowly. His eyes studied her face with a kind of guarded curiosity. Carter, he asked, voice gravelly. That name sounds familiar. Emily gave him a neutral smile. It's fairly common. He didn't press. She walked him through the findings, the condition of his arteries, the urgency of intervention, the surgical risks. He nodded at intervals, stoic in his responses. When she finished, he asked one question. Are you confident you can fix it? She met his gaze. Yes, sir, I am. He gave a faint, approving grunt. Then do it. She stepped out into the hallway and took a long breath before heading to the nurse's station to begin prepping surgical orders. As she finalized notes on the chart, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't look up at first. Emily. The voice stopped her mid-sentence. She turned her head. Jordan stood there in a charcoal gray suit, looking slightly disheveled, as if he hadn't slept. Next to him stood Claire Benson, dressed immaculately in a cream blouse and high-waisted trousers, the faintest smirk playing at the corner of her lips. Emily's face remained composed. Jordan, she said coolly. His expression flickered between shock and something close to discomfort. You're his surgeon? Claire folded her arms. Well, isn't that poetic? Emily ignored her and turned directly to Jordan. Your father needs immediate bypass surgery. I'll be leading the team. Jordan looked unsure, as if wrestling with conflicting thoughts. Is that appropriate? He asked carefully. Given our history? Her voice stayed calm. This isn't about you. It's about him. And I'm the attending with the most experience in cases like his. If you prefer another surgeon, you're welcome to request one. Claire raised her brows. clearly enjoying the tension. "Jordan, maybe we should talk to the hospital board, just to be sure there's no bias." Emily turned to her with a look that was calm but razor-sharp. "Your concern is noted, but my responsibility is to the patient. And unless the patient or his legal representative formally objects, I'm proceeding." Thomas's voice called from inside the room. "Jordan, come in here." Jordan hesitated, then stepped past Emily and entered the room. Claire lingered for a moment longer, her eyes trailing Emily with something between suspicion and annoyance. Then she turned and followed him. Emily stood in the hallway, her heart pounding. It was the first time she had faced them both since the breakup. There had been no confrontation before, no dramatic ending, just silence and distance. And now here they were, forced into her professional world. She returned to her office and sat down, staring again at the file. The irony of the situation gnawed at her. Her ex had left her for someone who embodied a more visible form of success. But here he was, standing in her domain, watching her make life-and-death decisions with a calm he could never understand. A few hours later, as she walked through the surgical planning unit, a junior resident flagged her down. "Dr. Carter, there's something odd in the patient's past scans," he said. His previous stress test results were borderline, but they weren't flagged. And his last cardiologist visit, something feels off in the notes. She took the tablet and reviewed the scans. Her brow furrowed. The data showed signs of a high-risk condition, a rare anomaly in the left coronary artery that could complicate the bypass approach. It had gone unnoticed. Had she not looked deeper, it might have been fatal on the table. She called for a CT angiogram and made urgent changes to the pre-surgical plan. The room around her buzzed with activity as her team scrambled to adapt. It wasn't unusual to uncover surprises in cardiac cases, but the gravity of this one, combined with the personal context, made it harder to ignore. Hours passed. The new scans confirmed her suspicions. It was a variant that required a highly customized graft route. The margin for error had just shrunk considerably. Later that evening, as she stood reviewing imaging slides, Jordan approached her again in the viewing room. "I heard you're changing the procedure," he said, voice tense. Emily didn't look away from the screen. "Yes, there's a rare anomaly in his artery structure. If we follow the standard plan, it could have gone very wrong." He paused. "Why didn't the previous doctors catch that?" "I can't speak for them," she said, "but I found it. That's what matters now." He looked at her differently this time, not with suspicion, but with something like grudging respect, or maybe regret. It didn't matter. "You're really going to do this?" he asked softly. "Operate on him?" Emily turned to him fully. "Yes, Jordan, I am." And she walked past him, already thinking ahead to the next day. The operation would be long, complex, and critical, but Emily Carter was no longer haunted by the ghost of what she had lost. She was moving forward, scalpels, sutures, and strength leading the way. The morning of the surgery dawned gray, rain pelting softly against the high windows of Lakeside Medical's cardiovascular wing. Emily arrived earlier than usual, her movements deliberate, her mind already calculating the hours ahead. Every bypass was a test of precision and endurance, but this one carried a different weight, a quiet awareness of spectators waiting just beyond the operating room doors. She changed into scrubs in silence, her badge clipped to her chest, hair twisted into a knot with surgical efficiency. By the time she entered the pre-op briefing, her team was assembled and waiting. They stood when she entered, a sign of both respect and routine. Emily greeted them with a nod and motioned to the screen behind her. "We're modifying the graft path to accommodate the coronary anomaly discovered in yesterday's CT," she began, tapping a stylus against a 3D rendering of Thomas Miller's heart. "This region here," she pointed toward the left coronary, "requires an angular bypass. I prepared a custom graft outline based on the new imaging." There were questions. Emily answered each with practiced calm. Her authority in that room was absolute, not out of arrogance, but earned through countless hours in surgery, leading by example, saving lives where others faltered. Once the prep concluded, she left the room briefly to check on the patient. The hallway outside the pre-op suite was quiet. Only a few nurses moved through, their steps muffled by rubber soles on tile. Thomas Miller was sitting up in bed, dressed in a pale blue gown, for lines feeding into his arm. A monitor beeped steadily beside him. He looked at her as she entered, not with fear, but with clarity. "You're here early," he said, voice rough from fasting and fatigue. "I wanted to check in before anesthesia," Emily replied. "We're making some changes to the graft plan. It's a more complex route, but safer." He gave a slight nod. "Do what you need to do." There was a pause. Then he said, "Jordan told me about you, about your history." Emily stayed composed. "This is about your health, Mr. Miller. Nothing else matters." He studied her for a long second. He was wrong to leave someone like you, whatever the reason was. She met his gaze. There was a moment of mutual understanding, the kind that didn't require elaboration. Then she placed her hand lightly on the rail of his bed. "I'll see you on the other side of this," she said, and stepped out into the corridor. As she turned the corner toward the prep room, she was met with a sight of Claire standing just outside the surgical observation gallery. She wore a fitted coat and high heels, her arms crossed, one foot tapping softly as if she owned the hallway. "You're really going through with this?" Claire said, not quite a question, not quite a taunt. Emily stopped. "The patient needs surgery. That's what I do." Claire's lips curved into a smile, tight and unkind. "And what happens if you make a mistake? What if he doesn't make it? You think anyone would believe it was accidental, given, well, everything?" Emily didn't flinch. "I know what I'm capable of. Do you?" Claire blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness in Emily's voice. Then she smirked again, but it faltered at the edges. Emily turned away and continued toward the oar, not giving her another second of her attention. Inside the observation suite, Jordan stood behind the glass, arms crossed, his face pale and unreadable. He had seen the exchange. He had heard Claire's jab. But when Emily entered the surgical prep area, she left them both behind like static in her wake. She scrubbed in, hands moving with automatic precision. The surgical techs helped her into her gown and gloves. Her second-in-command, Dr. Ortiz, met her at the door. "Ready?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Let's save a life." The operating room lights flared to life. Machines beeped in rhythm. The air chilled, sterile and sharp. Thomas was wheeled in, already under the influence of anesthetic, and Emily took her place at the table. The first incision was clean, the rib spreader set into place with practiced care. Each layer of the procedure unfolded like choreography. Her team moved as one, anticipating her next step, handing instruments before she asked, adjusting as she guided them through the modified graft route. The complication came 70 minutes in. A small but critical tear in the artery near the left anterior, descending branch threatened massive bleeding. Emily saw it immediately. Her hands froze for half a second. "Suction. Now!" she ordered. The team moved into high gear. Ortiz adjusted the retractor, while Emily repositioned the graft. Her fingers worked swiftly, eyes never leaving the torn edge. She sutured the tear with ultrafine filament, sealing the breach while maintaining perfusion through the bypass. In the observation room, Jordan leaned forward, his hand gripping the railing. Claire said something beside him, but he didn't answer. His attention was locked on the figure in blue below, whose calm under pressure contradicted every petty narrative Claire had ever tried to spin. Back in the oar, Emily completed the final graft connection and checked the circulation flow. The monitors stabilized. The heart responded exactly as she had hoped. Her eyes didn't show triumph, only confirmation. "Close him up," she said, stepping back slightly to allow the finishing work. The entire procedure had lasted just under 4 hours. As Emily stripped off her gloves and gown, her face was slick with sweat, but her posture remained strong. Outside, rain still tapped on the windows. She changed back into scrubs and exited the surgical wing. Jordan was waiting. "Is he?" "He's stable. The surgery was a success," she said before he could finish. "He'll be in recovery for the next few hours, then move to cardiac ICU." Jordan looked stunned. "That tear, I saw it. The way you handled it, that could have gone bad fast." "It didn't," she replied, then added, "You should go sit with him when he wakes up." He nodded slowly, eyes drifting toward the ICU doors. "You were always better than me," he murmured. She stopped mid-step, glanced at him once, then kept walking. Behind her, Jordan turned back toward the waiting area, and Claire, now sitting alone, stood as he approached. He said nothing as he walked past her. Emily didn't look back. That night, after the final rounds and patient checks, she stood alone in the hospital's rooftop garden, a quiet space barely lit by amber security lights. She let the chill brush against her face, grounding herself after the intensity of the day. The surgery was behind her, the confrontation too. But something told her this story wasn't over yet, and she was ready, no matter what came next. The hospital lights flickered softly as night shifted into morning, casting a bluish hue along the ICU corridor. Emily sat at a desk near the nurse's station, reviewing the postoperative notes. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment longer than usual, mind tethered not to the data, but to the lingering weight of what had transpired less than 24 hours earlier. Thomas Miller was stable, recovering, and showing positive signs. The surgery had been a success in every clinical sense. Yet, something inside Emily remained unsettled. Not about the procedure, but about the tension growing quietly around her. The kind that didn't yet have a name but settled in the air like static. She had felt it during her rounds that morning. A pair of junior residents pausing their conversation when she walked by, a nurse hesitating before speaking. Even Dr. Howard, the cardiac department chair, had offered her a look that was neither congratulatory nor critical, merely watchful. Emily closed the patient file and leaned back slightly in her chair. She was not new to scrutiny. As one of the youngest female surgeons in her division, she had grown accustomed to quiet evaluations, the invisible checklist others seemed to apply only to her. But this was different. This felt personal. And it started the moment Jordan and Claire walked back into her world. Later that afternoon, she entered a scheduled meeting with Dr. Lena Alvarez, the hospital's medical ethics officer. The appointment had been added to her calendar without explanation. Lena, a former surgeon turned administrator, greeted her with a neutral smile as she gestured for Emily to sit. "I appreciate you coming in, Dr. Carter," she began, her voice even but formal. "I've received a request for an internal review regarding your recent operation on Mr. Thomas Miller." Emily's spine straightened. "From whom?" Lena checked the screen of her tablet. The complaint was filed by Mr. Jordan Miller. He cited concerns about potential bias due to your previous relationship with him. Emily felt the air still. Not anger, not shock, just a strange, slow-curling disappointment. Bias? His father is alive because of that operation. "I'm not here to judge the quality of your work," Lena replied quickly. "In fact, the surgical outcome was exemplary, but we are obligated to follow up on formal complaints, particularly when they involve personal histories that may present the appearance of conflict." Emily nodded slowly. "I disclosed nothing to the patient that would violate professional conduct. I followed every protocol, and I informed my supervising surgeon the moment I recognized the patient's connection." Lena gave a faint nod. "I've reviewed your logs. There's no evidence of deviation. However, the optics are complicated, especially considering the high-profile nature of the parties involved." "You mean Claire Benson?" "I mean both of them," Lena said. "They've been vocal in media circles before. We need to be prepared for potential public scrutiny." Emily's jaw tightened, but her voice remained measured. "Are you suggesting I should have stepped aside simply because someone from my past appeared in the hallway? I'm saying we have to anticipate how these situations are perceived outside the OR. We want to support you, Emily, but you should know that a formal review panel may be convened." Emily didn't respond for a moment. She simply sat there, her heart steady but her mind grinding through the implications. A man had walked out of her life, re-entered it under crisis, and now, when she had done the very thing she was trained for, he questioned her integrity, not her skill. She stood. "Let me know when the panel is scheduled." That evening, she found herself in the empty staff lounge, hands wrapped around a lukewarm coffee. Maya Liu walked in minutes later, still in scrubs, her hair pulled back, exhaustion in her posture. "You heard?" Maya asked. Emily nodded. Complaints real. They're reviewing me. Maya sank into the chair across from her. This is absurd. No, it's calculated, Emily said. Claire knows what she's doing. Jordan, he's just following. They won't find anything, Em. That's not the point. The damage is done. Even if I'm cleared, people start to wonder, did she act emotionally? Did she make that decision to prove something? That seed stays in their minds. Maya exhaled, rubbing her temples. So, what are you going to do? Stand my ground, Emily said. I didn't ask for this storm, but I'm not hiding from it either. 3 days later, the hospital officially notified her of a pending internal hearing. She would be questioned on her decision to lead the operation, the timeline of disclosure regarding the patient's family connection, and whether any emotional factors could have influenced clinical decisions. She prepared meticulously, compiled her surgical logs, communications, procedural notes, and imaging data. Every line, every timestamp, every decision she had made was backed by medical reasoning. Still, she knew what they would really be listening for wasn't written in reports. It would be in her tone, her composure, the way she answered when they asked her why she didn't hand the case to another surgeon. On the morning of the hearing, Emily arrived dressed in navy blue slacks and a pressed blouse. No white coat, no stethoscope, just herself. The review board met in a modest conference room with a rectangular table, windows drawn, no press or spectators. Dr. Alvarez sat ahead, joined by 3 senior staff members, including Dr. Howard. Jordan and Claire were there too. Claire wore that same impossible stillness, her arms folded tightly. Jordan avoided eye contact, staring at the table as if the grain in the wood might offer salvation. The proceedings began. Emily answered every question directly. She explained the sequence of events, her decisions, the protocols followed. She never raised her voice, never hesitated. When asked if she felt emotionally compromised by the patient's connection to her ex-partner, she responded, "No. If I had, I would have recused myself. My focus was and remains on patient outcomes. The rest is irrelevant." Then Claire spoke. She told Jordan to leave the decision to her. She said, feigning concern, "That feels coercive." "She did what?" one of the board members asked, tilting his head. Claire's eyes sparkled, sensing the tension. She looked right at him and said she was the most qualified, that she would proceed unless he objected. It didn't seem professional. Emily didn't flinch. "What I said is true. I am the most qualified," and the patient had no objections. The procedure was successful. If I hadn't made a call to alter the graft path, he wouldn't have survived. Jordan shifted uncomfortably. Then, to everyone's surprise, he finally spoke. "She didn't coerce anyone," he said quietly. "She just told the truth." Claire shot him a look sharp enough to slice glass. The board fell silent. Dr. Alvarez took notes. Dr. Howard folded his hands. The hearing concluded without incident. Emily stood and left the room without looking back. Outside, rain began to fall again, streaking the windows like smudged charcoal. Emily walked alone toward the stairwell, each step heavy but sure. She had done everything right, yet the burden of perception was a weight no scalpel could cut through. As she reached the top of the stairwell, her phone buzzed. A message from Maya. "I'm in your corner, whatever happens." Emily allowed herself one moment of stillness before replying, "I know." Then she climbed the final steps toward whatever would come next, still upright, still unshaken. 2 days after the hearing, Emily returned to her rotation schedule as though nothing had happened. She moved through post-op rounds with her usual precision, responding to questions from residents, and issuing orders without falter. From the outside, she seemed unaffected, but behind the composure, her focus had sharpened. She knew her every move would be watched now. Each note she wrote, each decision she made, each interaction replayed in whispers behind glass doors. She had no room for error. And yet, it wasn't fear that kept her alert. It was resolve. Thomas Miller remained in the cardiac ICU, stable and recovering. She checked on him personally every morning. He'd begun sitting up, eating solid food, asking questions about the timeline for physical therapy. Emily answered all of them succinctly, maintaining the boundary between physician and patient, despite his growing warmth toward her. "You don't waste words," he said one morning as she adjusted his monitor. "That's how I know you're good at your job." "I find they get in the way," she replied, offering a faint smile. He nodded. "You and I might be more alike than I thought." She finished updating his chart and left the room, but his comment stayed with her for the rest of the day. That same afternoon, while reviewing older notes in the electronic health record system, she opened a file that had been attached as part of Thomas's original referral. It was a report from an independent cardiologist who had seen him just 6 months earlier in Evanston. The file had been overlooked during the initial prep because it was uploaded to the general diagnostics section, not the cardiovascular folder. Curious, Emily opened it. The report was brief but unsettling. The cardiologist had strongly recommended a full cardiac catheterization due to observed arrhythmias and reported symptoms of exertional fatigue. More importantly, it included lab values that hinted at elevated troponin levels, clear indicators of cardiac stress. The recommendation was flagged as urgent, but the follow-up box had been left blank. Emily's brow furrowed. She cross-referenced the hospital's intake forms. There was no catheterization record, no intervention, nothing. She printed a report and walked down the hall to Dr. Ortiz's office. He was finishing a phone call when she entered. "Problem?" he asked, motioning for her to close the door. "I need your eyes on this," she said, handing him the report. He scanned the document. "These values are not recent?" "No, they're 6 months old." Ortiz looked up, brow creasing. "And there was no follow-up?" "Not according to the chart." "That's not right. This should have triggered a cascade." Where was he being followed? Private practice. In Evanston. Ortiz leaned back. Could be a data transfer error. Could be the referral got lost in the shuffle. Emily nodded. Or someone ignored it. They both knew what that meant. Negligence. Emily spent the next few hours digging deeper into Thomas's medical records. She traced billing logs, referral timestamps, even phone call summaries between offices. One document caught her attention: a scan intake form from a clinic connected to a startup telehealth service. At the top of the page, under the clinic's logo, was a familiar name: Bentech Health. She froze. Claire Benson's company. Emily's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She opened the Bentech site and began scanning their listed services. One of the primary offerings was AI-assisted diagnostics for cardiovascular symptoms. The platform was designed to minimize in-person appointments, relying heavily on algorithm-based evaluations and remote consultations. Her heart sank. She knew enough about emerging tech and medicine to understand how such systems worked, and failed. They were fast, scalable, and in many cases helpful. But they could not replace clinical judgment, not when life or death conditions were involved. Not when someone like Thomas Miller had been flagged for urgent testing and left without intervention. Emily printed the intake form and highlighted a single section: consultation performed via Bentech AI Review Suite. There was no cardiologist's signature, just an automated notation: condition deemed non-critical at time of review, follow-up deferred. She took the file to Maya that evening. They sat in Maya's cramped office, files spread between them, the air tense. "This is malpractice," Maya said flatly. "And if Claire's platform is running diagnoses like this without oversight." She knew. Emily cut in. She had to. Thomas was under their care. The algorithm dismissed a heart condition that nearly killed him. Maya leaned forward. "You can't go public with this yet. You need evidence that links the company to the missed care. Screenshots and reports aren't enough." "I'm not going public," Emily said, voice quiet but firm. "But I am going to confront them. Off record. I want to see how they respond." Maya looked uneasy. That could get messy. Emily didn't answer. She already knew it would. 2 days later, Claire showed up at the hospital with Jordan. Thomas had requested to see them both, and Emily stood at the back of the room as they entered. He smiled faintly, clearly gaining strength. "Didn't expect to see both of you today," he said. Jordan walked up beside the bed. "We figured we owed you the time." Claire gave a practiced smile. "You're looking better than I expected." Emily stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, if you'll excuse us for a moment, I need to speak with your visitors privately." Thomas raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Don't take too long. I'm expecting pudding." Outside the room, in a side hallway near the ICU entrance, Emily turned to face Claire directly. "I reviewed the diagnostics that preceded your platform consultation on Thomas Miller." Claire's face remained unreadable. "And you know as well as I do that your AI flagged his condition as low risk when it wasn't. You ignored a specialist recommendation. That's why he collapsed. That's why I had to operate." Claire's expression didn't change, but Jordan flinched. "That's a bold accusation," Claire said coolly. "I'm not accusing. I'm stating a fact. I've seen the files. I have copies." Claire's smile tightened. "Then take them to the board or the press. But you better make sure you've covered every angle, because I got lawyers who do nothing but clean up misunderstood tech failures." "I'm not looking for a fight," Emily replied. "But if you ever suggest again that I operated with bias, I'll bring every piece of evidence I have to the Medical Licensing Board and to every regulatory agency your company ever brushed past." Jordan looked at Claire. "Is this true?" Claire glared at him. "This isn't the time." But Jordan had already turned away, his expression taut with realization. Emily didn't wait for more. She walked back to the ICU, to the patient whose life she had just saved, and away from the woman who had nearly ended it with negligence disguised as innovation. The storm had shifted, but it was far from over. By the following morning, word had begun to circulate in quiet, informal channels. A few hushed conversations between administrators, a look exchanged between two nurses in the elevator. Emily felt it in the subtle way people greeted her, as though a new layer had settled on her identity, invisible but tangible. She wasn't just a surgeon who had saved a patient in a high-stakes case. She was now also the woman standing at the precipice of something larger, something political, ethical, and potentially explosive. Back in her office, she reviewed updates from the ICU. Thomas Miller's vitals continued to stabilize. He had requested an early physiotherapy consult, signaling that his recovery was on the right track. Yet, for Emily, the sense of accomplishment was dulled by the tension building outside the hospital walls. She had not made any official move regarding Bentech Health. No whistle blowing, no formal complaint. Not yet, but the confrontation with Claire had changed the atmosphere irreversibly. Now it was only a matter of time before the pressure cracked. Around noon, she headed to the hospital cafe for a moment of quiet. The room was half full, mostly residents grabbing quick lunches. As she filled a cup of black coffee, a familiar voice called from behind her. "Bold strategy, Emily." She turned to find Claire Benson standing near the table closest to the exit, a sleek tablet tucked under one arm, wearing that same sculpted calm. She wasn't alone. A man in a tailored blazer, mid-40s, watched silently from across the table. Emily recognized him from a tech industry profile. Bentech's legal counsel. "I didn't expect to see you here again," Emily said evenly. Claire smiled without warmth. "I'm here to check on your patient. Or mine, depending on your point of view." Emily stepped closer, her tone quiet and direct. "If you're planning to intimidate me, Claire, you're wasting your time. The data speaks for itself." The lawyer finally spoke. "We're not here to argue. We're here to contain." Emily tilted her head slightly. "That's an interesting word choice." Claire interjected, her tone clipped. "You may think you've uncovered something, but our review of the platform shows no deviation from expected AI parameters. The fault, if any, lies in the human side of data input. We're treating it as a clerical oversight." "A clerical oversight that nearly killed a man," Emily replied. Claire didn't blink. "Prove intent. Prove knowledge. Prove liability. Otherwise, it's just a tragic coincidence in a system that processes over 50,000 patients a month." Emily stared at her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "Then we'll let the system decide. And I don't mean your algorithm." She turned to leave, walking away without another word. The legal counsel didn't follow. Claire did. "Still chasing morality over survival?" she asked, her voice low. Emily stopped just long enough to respond. Still mistaking visibility for virtue? She walked off, leaving Claire in the cafe, surrounded by silence that felt much louder than it should have been. Later that afternoon, a more personal confrontation unfolded in a place far less public. Emily was walking back toward the Orr suite when she heard someone call her name. She turned to find Jordan standing near a supply station, eyes wary, hands in the pockets of his coat. "Do you have a second?" he asked. "I'm in between cases," she said without commitment. He gestured toward a quiet hallway, and they walked together in silence until they reached an unused consultation room. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. "I didn't know," Jordan said, "about the report, about the platform misreading his condition." Emily didn't reply. She let him speak. "I trusted Claire's judgment. I assumed their system worked because she said it did. I didn't check the files. I didn't question the absence of follow-up. And then he collapsed, and suddenly none of the assurances mattered." She crossed her arms. "You trusted her because she was confident, not because she was right." He exhaled. "Yeah." There was silence for a few seconds. Then he looked at her with something softer, less pride, more regret. "She's unraveling," he said. "Not publicly yet, but she's pushing hard behind the scenes. Try to erase anything that could connect her to that diagnostic error." Emily raised her eyes. "And you?" He hesitated. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." She stepped forward slightly, then figured out, fast, because this isn't just about Claire. It's about a system that's hurting people while pretending to save them. "I never meant to drag you into this." Emily didn't let him finish. "You didn't drag me. I was already standing where I needed to be. You just showed up in the wrong story." She left before he could answer. That night, she returned home to a stack of papers and an inbox full of pending requests. Among them was a message from a former colleague, now working at a regulatory agency. It simply read, "I heard about the case. You're not the only one asking questions. Call me." The wall between Emily's personal and professional lives had officially collapsed. She was no longer just a surgeon dealing with a difficult patient. She was a reluctant participant in a corporate reckoning. And she wasn't alone. The next morning, she was on her way to the ICU for Thomas's discharge planning when Maya caught her in the hallway. "You've got company," Maya said, nodding toward the lobby. Emily turned and saw Thomas Miller himself being wheeled toward the elevator in a transport chair. He looked thinner but more alert, wearing a zip-up sweater and holding a folder of discharge instructions. When he saw Emily, he waved the nurse off and motioned for her to approach. "They're sending me home," he said. "Seems I have you to thank." "You did the hard part," Emily replied. He shook his head. "No, you did." There was a pause. Then he added, "My son made a mistake, and I made a bigger one by letting him walk away from someone like you." Emily didn't respond, not out of coldness, but because there was nothing more to be said. She watched as he was taken to the elevator, nodding once before the doors closed. By the time she returned to her office, an official email awaited her inbox. The hospital board had concluded their ethics review. The verdict: Emily Carter had acted within all standards of medical conduct. No further action would be taken. She closed the email, exhaled, and returned to work. But she knew this wasn't the end. Somewhere beyond the sterile walls of the hospital, the storm was still gathering, and Emily was already preparing for it. The light in the operating theater was unforgiving, a sterile white that exposed every detail with clinical indifference. Emily Carter stood at the center of it all, gloved, gowned, and motionless for a brief second before signaling the start of the procedure. This wasn't Thomas Miller's surgery. That was already in the past. Today's patient was a 78-year-old woman with a severely calcified aortic valve. Complex, high risk, and nothing unusual for Emily. But as the scalpel touched skin, she felt the sharp edge of something intangible beneath the surface. Tension, not in her hands, but in the atmosphere around her. The hospital had changed in the weeks since the Miller surgery and the quiet confrontation with Claire Benson. The staff tried to pretend otherwise, but Emily could feel it in every exchanged glance, every hallway conversation that went quiet when she entered a room. She was still respected, perhaps more than ever, but she was also being watched. She could feel the duality in the way residents deferred to her now, not just with admiration, but with caution. It wasn't paranoia. It was protocol. Someone at the board had authorized increased internal auditing of all surgeries performed in the cardiovascular wing. The official reasoning was routine quality assurance, but Emily knew better. The exposure from her near involvement with Benteka's diagnostic failure had stirred discomfort among administrators. They were waiting to see if she'd become a liability or a whistleblower. So she focused on the only thing she could control, her work. The aortic replacement proceeded with precision. Her hands moved with the certainty of years honed under pressure, guiding sutures and clamps with minimal verbal instruction. Her team followed instinctively, fluid in their motions, executing each phase like a well-rehearsed ballet. The artificial valve was seated properly. The heart restarted, and the monitors confirmed a strong, rhythmic return. "Close up," she said quietly, stepping back as the surgical techs moved in. She stripped off her gloves and left the OR, walking briskly to the observation room to dictate her post-op notes. Maya Liu joined her minutes later, clipboard in hand, eyes alert. "Successful replacement," Maya said, checking a few notations. "Patient's BP stabilized right after the aortic release." Emily nodded, still typing. "We'll keep her in post-op ICU for 72 hours. She's diabetic, prone to slow recovery." Maya hesitated before asking, "You heard what happened downstairs?" Emily looked up, expression unreadable. "No." "What?" Claire Benson showed up. Again. Emily's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "Why?" She met with the hospital's legal department. She didn't go through the front desk. Someone buzzed her in through administrative access. Security didn't stop her? No one's stopping her. Not yet. Emily closed the file and stood. "Then I'll do it myself." That same afternoon, Emily requested a formal meeting with the hospital's compliance officer, Dr. Terrence Vaughn, a soft-spoken man who rarely left his office unless summoned. She found him seated behind a desk piled high with binders, an untouched cup of coffee steaming beside a stack of printouts. "I understand Claire Benson is meeting with your team," she began. Dr. Vaughn looked up, his brow already pinching. "She's not discussing medical procedures. It's a preemptive review of liability protections related to platform use. Their lawyers are positioning Benteka's services as advisory only. They were the sole diagnostic point for Thomas Miller's cardiology review," Emily said. "Advisory or not, a misdiagnosis was past them, and they cleared it without human confirmation." Vaughn gave a slow nod. "We're reviewing those records. But I caution you, Dr. Carter, Benteka has a broad web of institutional partners. Their tools are embedded across several hospital systems. Going after them directly could trigger consequences you're not prepared for." "I'm not going after anyone," Emily said. "But if a flawed system nearly killed a patient under my care, I won't stand by and pretend that didn't happen." Vaughn sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Then you should prepare for them to fight back. Viciously." Outside, the day faded into a dull gray evening. Emily made her way back toward the surgical floor, stopping only when she saw Jordan waiting near the staff elevator. He looked thinner than before, paler. The weight of his father's recovery, the failed relationship with Claire, and the growing pressure from the unfolding scandal seemed to have hollowed something in him. "She's preparing a countersuit," he said as soon as Emily stopped. "Claims you defamed her company, that you fabricated the link between the diagnostic error and the surgery." Emily didn't react. "She's bluffing. She's dangerous. She's desperate," Emily corrected. "And I have records, logs, a timeline. She can't bury all of it." Jordan hesitated. "I think she's going to leak something to the press. Something about us." Emily raised her chin. "Let her. I don't need to defend my past. Only my patients." For a moment, the silence between them stretched. Then Jordan said, "My father asked me if I ever regretted what happened between us." Emily gave him a long, steady look. "And what did you say?" "I told him I didn't understand what I had when I had it." Emily's voice was calm. "You didn't, but now you do. So do something with that understanding." She walked past him and entered the elevator, the doors closing on whatever might have been said next. The following day, a notice appeared on the hospital's intranet, a scheduled press conference by Bentech Health to address recent speculation and false narratives about the integrity of its diagnostic AI platform. It was a clear warning shot. Emily printed a copy and pinned it to the bulletin board in the surgical lounge. Maya found her moments later, arms crossed. "They're going to spin this hard," Maya said. "They can try. Do you want me to pull the consultation logs from the central database? If we make it public, it needs to be airtight." Emily didn't hesitate. "Yes, and get in touch with that contact of yours at the regulatory office. Tell them I'm ready to speak." Outside, a storm gathered in the Chicago skyline, clouds forming in thick layers over the lake. Inside the hospital, another kind of storm was already in motion, whispers growing louder, tension stretching between professionalism and truth. Emily Carter, once discarded for lacking a certain brand of ambition, was now the eye of that storm. And this time, she had no intention of stepping aside. The days following the announcement from Bentech Health were heavy with tension. The hospital hummed with the undercurrent of whispered rumors and furtive glances. Emily felt it every time she passed the corridors, like invisible eyes were watching, measuring her resolve and doubting her intentions. The line between ally and adversary blurred within these walls where she once found refuge. She had returned to her schedule with surgical precision, balancing patient care with a growing mountain of paperwork related to the unfolding controversy. Every email, every phone call demanded her attention. Regulatory agencies reached out with requests for statements and documentation. The media had started sniffing around, sensing a scandal in the making. But Emily had learned to keep her guard, sharing only what was necessary, protecting both her patients and herself. That morning, a meeting was scheduled in the hospital's boardroom, an emergency gathering of administrators, legal counsel, and department heads to address the mounting pressure. Emily arrived just as the room filled, sensing the gravity in the air. "Dr. Howard sat at the head of the table, his usual calm veneer strained by the circumstances. "We're at a crossroads," he began, clearing his throat. "The situation with Bentech and Dr. Carter's involvement has attracted significant attention. We must manage this carefully, legally, ethically, and publicly." Emily listened silently as lawyers outlined potential scenarios. The possibility of a lawsuit against the hospital loomed large, as did the risk of damaging reputations. Claire Benson's company had already begun a media campaign painting Bentech as an innovative leader victimized by misinformation. The hospital's leadership feared being caught in the crossfire. Dr. Howard looked to Emily. "We appreciate your dedication, but I must caution you. Your actions have exposed the hospital to risk. I urge you to consider the bigger picture." She met his gaze steadily. "The bigger picture is patient safety. If we ignore flawed diagnostics because it's inconvenient, we fail in our duty." There was a pause. The board members exchanged glances. Finally, one of the attorneys spoke. "We recommend a formal review of all procedures related to Bentech's technology, a moratorium on its use pending investigation." Emily's heart quickened. This was the first official acknowledgement of the problem, beyond her own efforts. After the meeting, she stepped into the hospital's atrium. Jordan was waiting. His face was a map of exhaustion and regret. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this," he said quietly. "You didn't drag me," Emily replied. "But you can't stay on the sidelines." Jordan nodded slowly. "I'm trying, for my father's sake." Together, they agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation, their fractured past momentarily set aside for the sake of truth. In the days that followed, Emily pored over medical records and communications, compiling evidence of Bentech's negligence. She worked with Maya and her contact at the regulatory agency to prepare a comprehensive report. Each detail uncovered added weight to their case, exposing the risks of over-reliance on technology without human oversight. Meanwhile, Claire's influence began to wane as internal documents leaked, revealing attempts to suppress unfavorable findings and discredit whistleblowers. The media shifted tone, highlighting the dangers of unchecked innovation. Emily found herself invited to speak at conferences and panels about medical ethics and the importance of integrity in healthcare technology. Her voice, once quiet and reserved, grew confident and clear, inspiring others to question and challenge the status quo. One evening, as she prepared for a keynote speech, her phone buzzed with a message from Thomas Miller. "Thank you for saving my life. You have my deepest gratitude." Emily smiled softly. Amid the turmoil, it was a reminder of why she fought so fiercely. Because behind every procedure, every conflict, were lives worth protecting. The path ahead was uncertain, but Emily Carter faced it with unwavering resolve, ready to champion the true meaning of success: integrity, courage, and compassion. The sun had just begun to filter through blinds of Thomas Miller's private recovery suite, casting long streaks of light across the soft beige walls. Emily Carter stood near the window, finishing her notes on a tablet, when the door opened gently. Thomas entered, supported by a physical therapist, but his steps were steady and confident. His presence was calm, yet there was a gravity in his eyes that invited more than a routine check-in. "Dr. Carter," he said warmly, his voice carrying the quiet strength of a man who had seen many storms. "I wanted to thank you personally for everything, not just for the surgery, but for your honesty. That's rare these days." Emily nodded, offering a modest smile. "It's my duty. I'm glad you're recovering well." He motioned for the therapist to give them a moment of privacy, then turned to her fully. "I've been thinking a lot about the past, about my son and about you. It's clear now that I didn't understand the full story back then." Emily looked at him, sensing the sincerity beneath the words. "It wasn't easy for any of us." Thomas sighed. "Jordan told me some things, but he was always reluctant to speak openly. I guess I wanted to believe he was making the right choices, but I never imagined it would come at your expense." There was a silence that settled between them, filled with unspoken regrets and possibilities. Then Thomas continued, "I've spent my life chasing success, status, and appearances. I see now that I might have pushed Jordan too hard, expected too much, and failed to appreciate the people who truly mattered." Emily's eyes softened. "You're not alone. Many of us realize that too late." He smiled faintly. "That's why I wanted to ask you something, if you don't mind. Anything. Would you consider joining our family for dinner sometime? I'd like to get to know you better, outside of hospital walls, to understand a woman who saved my life and who means so much to Jordan." Emily hesitated briefly. Invitations like this weren't common, especially under such complicated circumstances. But the genuine kindness in his eyes made her consider the possibility of healing old wounds. "I'd like that," she said softly. Over the next few weeks, their relationship grew slowly but sincerely. Emily found herself welcomed into the Miller household, not as the ex-girlfriend or the surgeon, but as a respected and valued presence. Conversations ranged from light-hearted memories to serious discussions about family, responsibility, and forgiveness. One evening, during a quiet dinner at the Miller estate, Jordan opened up more than he had in years. "I was wrong," he admitted, eyes fixed on his plate. "Not just about you, Emily, but about myself. I thought success was about image, power, and control. I chased that with Claire because I was afraid to face what I really wanted." Emily listened quietly. "I see now that the real strength lies in integrity and commitment, in doing what's right, even when it's hard. You showed me that without even trying." Jordan's vulnerability was a fragile thing, but Emily recognized it for what it was: growth. She reached out and touched his hand gently. "I'm glad you see it. That's all anyone can ask for." Claire Benson was no longer a frequent topic, but the tension around her presence lingered like a shadow. The family had begun to distance themselves from her as the fallout from the Bentex scandal intensified. Jordan's decision to break ties was firm, supported by Thomas and ultimately by Emily. Meanwhile, Emily's reputation as a surgeon and advocate continued to rise. Invitations to speak at medical conferences poured in, and she used each platform to emphasize the importance of ethics, transparency, and compassion in healthcare. One afternoon, as she prepared for a keynote address on patient-centered care, she received a call from Thomas. "I want you to know," he said warmly, "that you've given our family more than just a second chance. You've reminded us what it means to be truly successful." Emily smiled, a profound sense of fulfillment settling in her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. That means more than you know." As she hung up, Emily looked out the window at the bustling city below, feeling a quiet certainty. Success, she realized, was never about appearances or fleeting achievements. It was about the lives we touch, the integrity we uphold, and the courage to stand firm in our values. Her journey with the Millers was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, Emily Carter felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. The morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of the hospital's conference room, casting a muted glow on the somber faces gathered around the long mahogany table. The atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation. Today was the day the internal hearing would convene to formally assess the controversy that had engulfed the hospital, the allegations tied to the Miller case, the involvement of Bentech Health's diagnostic platform, and most pointedly, Dr. Emily Carter's professional conduct. Emily arrived early, her footsteps echoing softly in the quiet hallway as she approached the room. Dressed in a simple navy blue suit, she carried herself with measured calm. Years of surgical training had honed not only her skills, but also her ability to maintain composure under pressure. Yet this was different. A battleground not of medicine, but of politics and reputations. As she entered, a cluster of hospital administrators, legal counsel, senior physicians, and board members greeted her with varying degrees of formality. Jordan Miller was also present, seated discreetly near the back, his face pale but resolved. Claire Benson, ever composed, sat at the opposite end, flanked by her legal team. The hearing began promptly. The chair of the panel, Dr. Lawrence Gray, an experienced administrator known for his strict adherence to procedure, called the session to order. Today, we examine the circumstances surrounding the treatment of Mr. Thomas Miller and the conduct of Dr. Emily Carter in relation to said treatment. He began. We will review evidence, hear testimonies, and ultimately determine whether any professional misconduct occurred. The room settled into a heavy silence. First, the hospital's chief legal officer presented a detailed chronology of events, from the initial diagnosis by the AI platform to the eventual surgery and subsequent fallout. The documents were meticulous, highlighting the diagnostic failure, the delayed intervention, and the emergence of the conflict between the involved parties. Next, Emily was called to provide her account. She rose, approached the table, and spoke clearly, her voice steady. Throughout the treatment of Mr. Miller, my priority has been and remains his health and safety. Upon recognizing the connection to Mr. Miller's family, I immediately disclosed this to my superiors and adhered strictly to hospital protocols. The decision to lead the surgical intervention was based on clinical assessment and expertise, free from personal bias. She laid out the modifications made during surgery, the discovery of the rare arterial anomaly, and her rationale for the approach taken. Questions followed, probing her timeline, communications, and decisions. Emily answered each with precision and transparency. When Claire Benson was invited to speak, she painted a different picture, one that suggested Emily had used the situation to advance her own agenda, casting doubt on her objectivity and professionalism. Her legal team presented documents suggesting conflict of interest and insinuated that the hospital's reputation was jeopardized by Emily's involvement. Jordan Miller's testimony surprised many. He spoke candidly about his initial doubts and the evolution of his perspective. I initially questioned Dr. Carter's involvement, he admitted. But after witnessing her professionalism and the successful outcome for my father, I stand firmly behind her. The suggestion that she compromised care is unfounded. His words brought a ripple through the room, drawing respectful nods from some panel members. The hearing stretched for hours. Witnesses were called, expert opinions offered, data scrutinized. Emily remained composed throughout, aware that the stakes extended beyond her career to the very integrity of patient care. Finally, after a brief recess, Dr. Gray returned with the panel's decision. After thorough review, this panel finds no evidence of professional misconduct on the part of Dr. Emily Carter. Her actions were consistent with the highest standards of medical care and ethics. Furthermore, the board acknowledges a failure in diagnostic processes involving the AI platform and recommends immediate reevaluation of such technology's role in patient care. A collective exhale seemed to fill the room. Emily allowed herself a small, relieved smile. Jordan reached out, briefly touching her hand in quiet solidarity. Claire's expression remained unreadable, but her lips pressed into a thin line. As the hearing concluded, Emily was approached by Dr. Howard. "Congratulations," he said with a nod. "You've cleared one of the most challenging hurdles any physician can face." Emily nodded back, grateful but wary. The victory was significant, but the broader battle over technology in medicine and the ethical challenges it posed was far from over. Outside the hospital, cameras awaited, eager for statements. Emily chose her words carefully. "My focus remains on patient safety and ethical care. Technology must support, not replace, the critical role of human judgment." As she walked away from the spotlight, Emily felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on her shoulders. The hearing had been a crucible, but it had also forged a resolve. The path ahead would demand more than skill. It would require courage, integrity, and the unwavering commitment to stand for what was right. And Emily Carter was ready. The morning after the hearing felt like a fragile calm before a storm. Emily Carter arrived at the hospital early, her mind alert but cautious. The official verdict had cleared her name, but the undercurrent she sensed suggested the battle was far from over. Outside the clinical walls, a different kind of drama was unfolding, a collision between truth and image that threatened to shatter carefully constructed illusions. By noon, the media frenzy escalated. Reporters had caught wind of internal leaks, revealing Bentech Health's internal documents. Emails and memos exposing deliberate attempts to suppress unfavorable clinical data related to the AI platform's diagnostic failures. Headlines range from tech giants' medical mirage to Bentech's reckless algorithms, a threat to patient safety. Claire Benson's carefully curated image began to crack. Social media buzzed with exposés from whistleblowers and former employees, painting a portrait of a company prioritizing profits over ethics. Photos emerged of Claire in lavish settings, juxtaposed against testimonials from affected patients. The public narrative shifted rapidly, and the court of public opinion was turning. In the hospital, Claire's presence was increasingly unwelcome. Staff avoided her gaze, and administrators kept interactions strictly professional and distant. Rumors spread that Bentech's board was reconsidering her leadership amid the growing scandal. Emily remained focused on her work, though the tension was palpable. During rounds, nurses whispered cautiously. Doctors exchanged furtive looks when Claire's name was mentioned. Yet, Emily's steadfast professionalism inspired those around her, strengthening her reputation as both a healer and a leader. One afternoon, Emily was summoned to the hospital's main lobby, where a small crowd had gathered. Journalists clamored for comments, microphones extended eagerly. Among them, Jordan Miller stood beside Emily, more composed than before, his support unwavering. Emily addressed the questions with measured clarity. Healthcare technology holds immense promise, but it must never replace the essential role of human judgment and ethics. Patient safety is paramount, and transparency must guide all innovations. The reporters pressed on about Claire and Bentech. Emily declined to speculate on ongoing investigations, but affirmed her commitment to exposing the truth. Later that evening, Jordan confided in Emily during a quiet moment in the hospital cafe. "Claire's empire is crumbling," he said softly. "The woman I thought I knew was a master of illusions." Emily nodded. "Appearances can be deceiving. True success is built on integrity, not image." Jordan looked at her, gratitude shining through exhaustion. "I'm sorry for everything. For doubting you. For letting her cloud my judgment." Emily smiled gently. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." In the following weeks, Bentech Health faced increasing scrutiny. Regulatory agencies launched formal investigations, and several hospital systems suspended use of their AI diagnostic tools. Claire Benson's public appearances dwindled, replaced by statements crafted by legal teams attempting damage control. Meanwhile, Emily received invitations to speak at national conferences, sharing her experiences and advocating for ethical standards in medical technology. Her voice resonated with authenticity, earning admiration and sparking conversations across the healthcare community. One evening, as she prepared for a keynote address, a message arrived from Thomas Miller. "Your courage has given me hope. Thank you for standing firm." Emily read the words twice before allowing herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The journey had been arduous, but the impact was real. Months later, Claire Benson resigned from her position amid mounting pressure. The fall of her carefully built facade was complete. Emily watched from afar, not with triumph, but with a sober understanding of the cost of success built on deception. Her own path was clear, one of honesty, compassion, and relentless pursuit of what was right. And in that, she found true success. The hospital corridors, once thick with whispered doubts and veiled stares, began to clear. Emily Carter moved through familiar hallways with a renewed sense of purpose. The storm that threatened to uproot her career had passed, leaving behind a landscape forever changed but fertile with new possibilities. With Claire Benson's resignation finalized and Bentech Health under investigation, the institution faced a crucial moment of reflection and rebuilding. Emily found herself at the center of this transformation, not just as a surgeon, but as a voice for ethical reform and patient advocacy. The administration invited her to join a newly formed committee tasked with evaluating emerging medical technologies. This group was charged with creating guidelines that balance innovation with rigorous ethical standards. Emily embraced the role, bringing firsthand experience and a clear vision to the table. During the first meeting, Dr. Howard addressed the group. "We're rebuilding trust, not just within these walls, but with our patients and the broader community." Dr. Carter's work has highlighted the vital importance of transparency and accountability in our practices. Emily listened as colleagues debated the future of AI integration, data oversight, and patient consent. She advocated for policies that place human judgment at the forefront, insisting that technology serve as a tool, not a replacement. Outside the committee room, her reputation blossomed. Invitations to lecture at universities and medical conferences grew steadily. She spoke candidly about the challenges faced, not only the clinical complexities, but the ethical dilemmas and personal resilience required. One afternoon, as she prepared for a keynote speech, Emily received a call from Thomas Miller. His voice was warm and steady. "I wanted to invite you to a community health initiative we're launching," he said. "It's aimed at increasing awareness of cardiovascular health and improving access to care." Emily smiled, touched. "I'd be honored to participate." Their collaboration blossomed into a partnership that extended beyond the hospital. Emily found joy in connecting with patients in the community, educating and inspiring. The work was demanding but fulfilling, grounding her in the reason she chose medicine. Jordan also found his footing. Having distanced himself from Claire and the toxic dynamics of his past, he began volunteering at the initiative. His relationship with Emily evolved from tentative respect to genuine friendship, built on shared commitment rather than old wounds. One evening, after a successful event, the three of them sat around a table, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. Thomas raised his glass. "To new beginnings." Emily and Jordan echoed the sentiment, their smiles genuine and hopeful. In her office, Emily displayed a framed photo from that night, an image of community members united in purpose. It was a reminder of how far she had come and the impact possible when integrity guided actions. Months turned into years. Emily assumed leadership roles, mentoring young surgeons and advocating for systemic change. Her name became synonymous with excellence and ethical steadfastness. Though the shadows of the past lingered, they no longer defined her. Instead, they fueled a relentless drive to build a future where patients were protected and truth prevailed. Success, Emily understood now, was not measured by accolades or appearances, but by the lives touched and the values upheld. And in that truth, she thrived. The conference hall was filled with a quiet murmur of anticipation as medical professionals, students, and advocates gathered from across the country. Emily Carter stood backstage, the microphone cool against her palm, the weight of the moment settling firmly on her shoulders. This was not just another speech. It was a culmination of years of struggle, resilience, and growth. The spotlight was hers, but the message belonged to so many others who fought alongside her. When her name was announced, Emily stepped onto the stage with calm confidence. The sea of faces greeted her with warm applause, but her mind was focused. She scanned the crowd, noting familiar faces from hospitals, universities, and advocacy groups, as well as a few she recognized from the regulatory agencies who had supported her cause. Taking a deep breath, she began. "True success," she said, her voice steady and clear, "is not defined by the accolades we receive or the status we achieve. It is measured by the integrity we maintain, the lives we touch, and the courage we summon to face adversity." She spoke of the rise of technology in medicine, the promise and the peril, and the necessity of human oversight and ethical vigilance. She recounted her own journey, carefully omitting names but emphasizing lessons learned. The importance of transparency, the dangers of complacency, and the power of standing firm in one's values. Throughout her address, Emily wove in stories of patients who had taught her as much as she had taught them, reminding the audience that behind every clinical case was a person, a family, a story. As the speech concluded, the applause was thunderous. Emily allowed herself a moment to absorb the recognition, not for personal glory, but as affirmation that her voice mattered. Backstage, Thomas Miller approached, his smile proud and genuine. "You inspire more than just me," he said quietly. "You've sparked change." Emily smiled. "We all have a part to play." Jordan joined them, looking more grounded than ever. "Thank you for showing me the meaning of strength." Later that evening, Emily stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The lights of Chicago stretched endlessly before her, vibrant and alive. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but she had arrived not just as a surgeon, but as a leader, an advocate, and a beacon of integrity. Her phone buzzed, a message from Maya. "Ready for the next chapter?" Emily replied with a simple word: "Always." True success was no longer a distant dream or an elusive ideal. It was a reality, built on character, resilience, and the unwavering belief that doing what is right is the greatest achievement of all. And as the city lights twinkled beneath her, Emily Carter knew she had finally found her place in the world.